34 hard hats with the lights on. Those represent the 34 miners or workers killed in mining operations from 2011 to 2015. In 2015, I accepted this position as Director of Mining and Health and Safety for Ontario because of these hard hats. For anybody who was associated with any of those hard hats extinguishing, it doesn't stop after 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The effect, the loss, the quietness lives on for a long time, probably forever in their lives. Which is why there was public outcry and a push to do something more, which led to the mines review, which led to the work we've done and why we're here today, which we want to share with you. When we look at the IRS and the work of the working group, it started all the way back in the 1970s, and it was from mining. In Elliott Lake, the working conditions weren't good. The workers became frustrated, had enough, and they decided to call a wildcat strike. It ended up gathering media attention to the national level, to the point where the province had to step in, and out of it came the Hams Commission, which led to the document, the report to the Royal Commission, and that led to what is known as the Internal Responsibility System, which is the foundational piece of the Occupational Safety Act. And although you can't find those three words together in the Act, they're inferred into the sections of the different parties, those of the owner, the contractor, those of the employers, supervisors, and workers, the Joint Health Safety Committee. And then the 2015 to the Mines Review, where we need to understand there's something wrong. We seem to understand the IRS, it seems to make sense, but why aren't we making the difference? Why aren't we having the impact we should? So it was time to relook at a lot of things, including the internal responsibility system. The working group put together 41 best practices. Now those are important because you can do water management program, because that's another great outcome of the Mines Review. But if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, it doesn't really matter. You can have a traffic management program. If people aren't doing what they're really supposed to be doing, it doesn't really matter. So the foundational piece of each workplace party doing what they're supposed to be doing has to be in place before we put all the other support tools, things like the management programs. In my private sector role, we were doing system culture audits, and I think that's what this is in need of. You can't just look at what the paper says you should be doing. You have to look at what people are doing, but understand why, and the interdependencies of those two things. And I think we can do this. So there was support by the OMA that we would take this on. We would work with the Institute for Work and Health and run with this. WSN took this at a high level, meaning when I came back to Candace and I explained to her, I think this is a game changer. I believe if we put the right resources doing the right things, we can change the world, and we can prevent any more hard hats from coming up onto these slides.
We were strategic in that we wanted to make sure that whatever we came up with, it made a difference. We have enough things out there that don't make a difference. We wanted to make sure it wasn't something that was going to sit there. We wanted to make sure it wasn't something that was just an extra checkbox. We wanted to make sure it had an impact. Now, although this initiates from the mining sector, we have an opportunity to do a lot of good work with this. So how do we take this and make it scalable, where the smaller operations can use it, the bigger operations can use it, but at the end of the day it makes a difference. So those were the 3 points that we kept in mind as we were developing this tool. So just kind of really quickly, the pilots, there was 6 sites. There was quite a few people actually in that room that put their hand up when we were searching for volunteers. So I think that was really great. So we ended up with 6 pilots that volunteered. We've done 5 so far, and we have the last one scheduled for May. Now we spoke to over 2,000 people in the Ontario mining sector just during this pilot phase. For a bit of perspective, that represents about 10% of the mining sector in Ontario, which is not bad for our little pilot. And we didn't just talk to the senior leadership team. We talked to the leadership team, we talked to the Joint Health and Safety Committee members, the contractors, the workers, the supervisors. Why? It's the IRS. We really need to get our head around this. So what we did is we took those 42 best practices, which were great, but it's a little bit difficult if we say, okay, you need to do these 42 things. So what we started to do is we started to draw out the themes. What were those best practices actually looking for? So the first piece here is leadership, commitment, and vision. You can have the best system in the world, If you don't have leadership commitment, you don't have anything at the end of the day. Change in risk management, as Mike talked about, you can have water management program, but it needs to function. It's a control. Then we looked at communication and accountability and transparency. The IRS is based on that accountability piece, so that really needs to shine through. So we start to break these up into phases. So when we designed the CAAT tool, we wanted to make sure, again, it wasn't just another audit, it wasn't just another piece. So when we give recommendations now, with the CAAT tool, we break up these building blocks and we're able to give recommendations in phases so that people know where to start, instead of, again, throwing those darts at the board. So that makes up phase one. Then we look at training and awareness. We're talking about being responsive. I'm going to talk a little bit more, in a little bit more detail about this after Cam talks. The committee, and then participation and consultation, that makes up phase two. And then the other two pieces we looked at were control effectiveness and then management systems. So it's unique in the way that it's designed because it allows you can actually see the progression. It allows you to kind of walk up those maturity pieces. So for each one of those little steps that I just showed you, we're measuring two sides of the coin. We're measuring systems and we're measuring culture. That gives you the health and safety ecosystem. So basically the systems tell us what we need to do. The culture is what we actually do. And when we come to health and safety in the mining in Ontario, those two things we have been finding are not aligned. So if we just take the culture, which is represented in the blue, so we actually measure health and safety culture. And the red is measuring the health and safety system. If I were to measure only one of those, I'm only getting half the story. And then I'm making decisions with only half of the information out there. So the way that this CAAT tool is designed is that we're looking at both sides of the coin. You have to close those gaps between culture and systems. Okay? If you don't do that, it will fail. It's just a matter of when. So from that spider diagram, what we are able to do is we're able to mark where an operation sits in their IRS maturity. And there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. There is where you are, and there is where you want to be. Okay? So at the bottom we have compliance. We have stage 2, which is passive, stage 3 calculative, stage 4 preemptive, and then that top tier is called prosper. And the way that we do this is that everything is staged. Everything is staged in phases, in a maturity phase. So we're able to mark where the scores land.
I was down at the OMA Managers Committee meeting and Mike was telling everybody about this fantastic tool and he says, I'm looking for 6 more mines. I couldn't get my hand up fast enough. You know, mining's come, you know, the number of incidents and accidents over the years. I remember sitting in a safety meeting 29 years ago and talking about safety and production, and you know, people didn't really feel that you could have safety and production together. I'll tell you, we've come a long way. We've come from drifts of, you know, 25, 26 down to, you know, 2.3. The industry finished at 3.5 last year. You know, we're really driving safety to new levels, and how are we going to make that next little leap, you know, that leap to true zero harm, where everybody goes home safe at the end of the day? I don't have that answer. If I did, I'd be a multi-millionaire. I'd be sitting in Jamaica with Wayne Mones and, you know, John LeClaire, and we'd be talking about how rich we are because we solved the safety answer. I don't have that, but I do know that, you know, we've got to link arms. It can no longer be industry by themselves trying to solve it, you know, safety, and it can no longer be government by themselves or labor by themselves. We have to truly link arms together, and we've got to fight this together and drive safety to the new level, the next level, right? And Mike and the team brought this CAAT audit together, and I thought fantastic. It seemed to be an opportunity to really link with the government arm and drive safety to the new level. Cindy and the team have helped us, and what they did was got us to put together an IRS task force. So anyways, away we went. With WSN's guidance, we started this IRS task force, and I'll tell you, it's been a fantastic journey. We've done some amazing things as a team, and it's driven by the workers. It's the voice of the workers. We've actually we've actually rewritten the health and safety policy as a team, a collective team, and we had so much fun doing it, and the guys were so excited about doing it. I said, heck, let's rewrite the environmental policy while we're at it, and we did. At the end of this, what's the IRS task force, or what's the IRS CAAT tool? It's something different. We can't continue to do things the same way.
I have only 3 slides, which is, perhaps you're thinking, that's a little unusual for a science guy to only have 3 slides. But there are 3 slides telling the story of the 4 pilot sites who've participated with WSN to this point in time. The sites are anonymous as I talk about them, but in the 3 slides, they're all going to be in the same position. There's a mining operation on your left, there's 2 in the middle, and there's a mining operation on the right. Just orienting you now to what's being shown to you here. The IRS Perception Survey has 46 questions in it. The WSN team thought it was useful to group those 46 questions, each of which anchors to a best practice statement that was one of the products of the mining review. Each of the questions anchors to a best practice statement. And the 46 questions are grouped into 10 dimensions. So you see on the left-hand side, there's pilot site number 4 has 10 dots. Those are the 10 dimensions that are rendered from the 46 perception survey questions. The N number under each of the dot series is the number of people at each of the mining operations who completed the perception survey. Those are big numbers. And I just want to acknowledge that as mine managers were offered this pilot opportunity, there was essentially a choice. And Brian, I'm just going to reinforce something you said. There's a choice between ask 50 people, that'll be close enough, or ask everybody. And every one of these sites, the mine managers said, everybody's in, right? We're not going to choose people, we're going to take everybody. Good choice. Okay, the vertical dimension here is the weird thing for you. For those of us who do this for a living, we do this all the time. It's called a standardized score. The average for the approximately 2,000 people who work in the underground mining sector in Ontario who responded to the survey, the average across each of these 10 dimensions is 0. We just set it to 0. I'll spare you the math about how we did it. And then the difference is something called a standard deviation away from the average, which is set to 0. The difference between pilot site 4 and pilot site 3, the difference between, I'm going to give it away, the site with the best looking IRS, which is pilot site 4, 0.4 of a standard deviation above 0, and pilot site 3, which is over on the right, which is about negative 0.4, that difference is a full standard deviation. Each of these mining operations tends to score equivalently across the 10 dimensions. So pilot site 4 on the left, managers, supervisors, contractors present, and workers are all voting high in response to the IRS perception survey across all 10 dimensions. Similarly, pilot site 3, senior managers, supervisors, workers are all voting low compared to the other 3 pilot sites. We can reduce those 46 questions from 10 dimensions to 2. Those 2 dimensions concentrate on attributes of management practice, what the operation does, and the second dimension is the way in which the operation provides for opportunities for worker participation. And this was a really important theme in the work of the advisory group, and it goes way back to the founding definition of the IRS by the Ham Commission in underground mining in 1978. Workers need to have voice. They need to have opportunities to participate. And having crunched the 46 questions down to these two themes, it's still the same story. With pilot site number 4, strong on management, on perceptions, thank you, of management practice, and strong on perceptions of worker participation. And remember that the votes here are coming from senior managers, supervisors, contractors, and miners. What does this look like when we compare it to the frequency of work-related injury and illness? Because that's sort of the way we think this should work out. And here is the story. So on the right-hand side, upside down, is the frequency of work-related injury and illness as a rate per 100 full-time equivalents. Can you sort this out? So pilot site number 4 is an incident rate of lost time and no lost time claims over the 3-year period, 2013-2015, of 2.5, 2.6. Pilot site 3 on the right-hand side, twice as high. The story from this group of 4 underground mining operations, the perception surveys completed by 2,000 people in those operations, says that the perceptions of the internal responsibility system are, at minimum, associated with the frequency of work-related injury and illness. And I'll point to the 2 mining operations that landed in the middle on the IRS perception survey, also landed in the middle on the frequency of work-related injury and illness reported and accepted by the WSA. This 46-item questionnaire, assembled through the hard work of WSN, is sound. The 10 dimensions have, and here's a researcher speaking, strong internal consistency. It means they hang together, they make sense. The shorter version of the questionnaire, which has those 2 factors, only requires 32 questions, it works fine. The 4 sites are well discriminated by both of these approaches, the 46-item questionnaire and the 32-item questionnaire, and most importantly, the IRS perception survey scores are strongly correlated with the incidence of work-related injury and illness.
So as Cam explained, when we started to anchor the best practices down to some themes, when we drew it back, we end up with 8 health and safety factors out of those initial 10 that we started to look at. Okay? So the first one that came out loud and clear was leadership, commitment, and visibility. Now we have a bunch of ways that we do this. We have health and safety policies that we post, which is usually legislative compliance and whatnot. But I want you to think beyond that. Communication. Through a lot of these, we find if you just look at a system audit, yeah, we are communicating. But when you look at the perception, it's hitting the mark for certain people, but it's not hitting the mark for the other guys. Mutual trust. This was a big one. This is about making sure that everybody knows that it's an open environment. There's 4 pillars to strong culture. So it's ensuring that you have a learning culture, a reporting culture, a fair culture. So all these pieces are the things that you want to look at, and that mutual trust piece stands out. Training and competency. I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody that this is one of the big pillars. So making sure that they have the appropriate knowledge, the appropriate skill, and that everything is consistent. I would push that consistency piece. If you drive consistency from a system perspective, you can drive consistency from an outcome perspective. Responsiveness and resources, making sure that everybody has everything they need in order to make health and safety happen. So sometimes we find ourselves where we establish these health and safety goals, but we don't do anything to draw back on how we're going to get there. Joint Health and Safety Committee support. This one came out, which was really interesting. So the Health and Safety Committee is not a barrier. It is not a roadblock. It is not a speed bump. It is a partner. And it needs to be treated as a partner, and the committee needs to act as a partner as well. There's a big, strong role there. the involvement and empowerment dimension. Those people at the front line have the answers to the questions you never asked. And the biggest point that's missed is that involvement piece. And it works in two ways. It works to get things right, and it eases the buy-in, and it protects people. And then the rules and systems. Rules and systems set expectation. This is the standard at which we will operate. How well do we do that? Right? Very plain, very simple. So we've gone through this information. We have some information to work with. We have some information that starts to provide us context around the IRS, which we haven't had before. We have information that we can potentially act upon and intervene before something happens. Before you get that WSIB statistic, we can look at the CAAT result and you can see you have an opportunity to intervene.
We're going to build software and lean out the process so we can do an audit at a very low cost, basically, because we're not for profit. We have to finish with net zero, but we want to continue doing these audits. So we want to be able to turn this audit. And if you went to private market for this, this would be a very expensive audit. We're going to be working at bringing down the cost and the resources involved, and maybe even leading to some self-assessments so that organizations can and will want to do these, establish a benchmark, and not just do it once, establish that benchmark, look at the opportunities within improving their systems and their culture, and then be able to re-audit either parts of their system culture or all of it again at a very low cost.